So I'm in Milwaukee, Massachusetts. I'm in Wisconsin, and I had this new booktober tag that I did like a while back, and they asked what your favorite types of books are to read, and I said something along the lines I was going through a sci-fi phase, and I'm not really a big fan, and then I'm not really a big fan of romance and erotica. That may have changed. I guess I was just kind of going through a sci-fi phase. I thought I liked sci-fi because that's the type of visual media I consume. I like Star Wars and Star Trek and things of that nature. And to be honest, I've read sci-fi books that I enjoy. I, for the most part, enjoyed Starship Troopers and iRobot and absolutely loved Project Hail Mary. And the reason why I said that I disliked romance and erotica is because I started reading Court of Thorns and Roses and I had to put it down. Same thing with 50 Shades of Grey. They just made me so profoundly uncomfortable. I only read the first of the Twilight series because I just couldn't get into it. Any plot that's driven specifically by a relationship was just really not for me. So I gave romance a shot, but every single time I ended up putting it down because this character-driven narrative wasn't really my thing. So enter Malibu Rising. I had never read anything by Taylor J. Reid, and I had seen this book all over Instagram. I had friends who had read it. Everybody was talking about it, and I really tried really hard to make sure I didn't see any spoilers about it. I didn't want to know what it was about. I actually thought Malibu was in Florida. But as soon as I read it, it basically starts talking about the city of Malibu. And there's this beautiful woman who wakes up in her beautiful house to realize that she's getting divorced from her beautiful husband. And I'm like, God damn it. It's another sappy romance. Gross. I had just struggled to read so many romances, and I had put down so many of them. But you know what else book I really couldn't get into, and that I put down several times? Dune. Now, Malibu Rising, I couldn't put it down. And by put it down, I mean I couldn't stop listening to it. I'd be sitting outside of my destination, in my car, still trying to figure out what these people were going to do. The thing is the plot isn't even linear. It went against being the type of book of anything that I've ever said that I read or liked. The plot wasn't linear. It took place over the course of 25 years, but it was told through hours before a party. And honestly, you could argue that it takes place over the course of thousands of years. They talked about the nature of Malibu before all this began, and how Malibu will keep its same nature even after everyone in the book is dead. The story isn't really pieced together by time, but instead pieced together by location. Malibu is going to do what Malibu is going to do. The tides will ebb and flow. The weather will always be kind of chill and really mild. And every few decades, year after year, it's going to burn all the way the fuck to the ground. And basically, decade after decade in this ancient part of the world, decisions of characters start to make sense because they're dictated by the decisions of their family members of the past. This type of influence is not really changing. It's not really constant. It doesn't really have an arc in the same way that a character would. This influence is that of their family. It's this constant theme that your entire character and who you are as a person is driven by the personalities and decisions of the people that came before you. The characters themselves do have arcs. You have June. She starts as this beautiful Stepford wife, and she becomes a lonely drunk. You have Nina. She starts as this tense control freak whose entire personality is shaped by her past and her trauma. And she learns to let it go and relax. You've got Hud, who goes from being an honest good boy to being somebody who's secretive and needs to beg for forgiveness. You've got Jay, who goes from being a player to being emotional. You've got Kit, who goes from being hot-headed and stubborn to being insecure about her sexuality during a time period when you can't be insecure about your sexuality. But who am I missing? You know who doesn't change? Mick, because Mick is a dick. He's less of a character than he is just a catalyst for the plot. He's like this force of nature that just causes a bunch of conflict for everybody else. kind of like Parenthood itself.
I love the
But
hair.
ultimately, thank you, he's an asshole. And all these characters around him do these amazing things and do these amazing transformations and make a lot of dumb decisions, but he remains constant. And that's the thing that I think is missing from a lot of character-driven arcs that is not missing here. It's usually characterized by characters making dumb decisions. And I guess I kind of felt that way with June, how she sits around and drinks and pines after some guy that doesn't give a crap about her. I almost felt like I was watching a horror movie and like screaming at the protagonist, no, don't go in there, that's where the villain is. She doesn't see what she's doing to her family and what she's doing to herself. Her own 9-year-old daughter calls her a drunk. However, it is a believable part of her character arc. It's just like how in a science fiction novel, the characters develop because they're reacting to the forces of nature and the forces of the world and the plot that are acting upon them in the same way that she reacts to this unchanging jerk in her life. That's why, in a way, defining it by either plot-driven or character-driven doesn't really work for a novel like this. If you look at one of the quotes, kind of towards the beginning of the story, it says, 1956. Our family histories are simply stories. They are myths that we create about the people who came before us in order to make sense of ourselves. The story of June and Mick Riva seemed like a tragedy to their oldest child, Nina. It felt like a comedy of errors to their first son, Jay. An origin story for their second son, Hud. And a mystery to the baby of the family, Kit. And to Mick himself, it was just a chapter of his memoir. But to June, it was always and forever a romance. And Malibu Rising is just that. It's just a story. It's not a drama. It's not a tragedy. It's not necessarily plot-driven. It's not necessarily character-driven. I think the only accurate description of it is that it's technically a historical fiction. But between plot-driven and character-driven narratives, I question whether there's even room in modern literature for that sort of distinction. It's something that we often see in sci-fi and fantasy, and that's why I struggled to finish Dune. And that's why I struggled to finish Lord of the Rings. Having too much plot-driven structure and having too much character-driven structure can be boring at worst and frustrating at best. What it really needs is balance. I think this subversion of character-driven narratives versus plot-driven narratives, as seen through Nick Riva, who is more of a force of nature than a character, happens in this situation by taking a character and instead of giving him an arc, making him a plot point and making him sort of a part of the world building. And I can't think of any examples right now, but I'm pretty sure you could probably do the opposite. You can give your world an arc and have plot points that react and change and learn and grow based upon what occurs in the story. And I think that that subversion is kind of what is going to end up making character-driven narratives versus plot-driven narratives a completely obsolete distinction. So, yeah, thank you for running with me in Milwaukee. Goodbye.